Our next competitor very aptly calls himself a sculptor of the human physique. And it's Frank Zane at USA.
Frank Zane, of course, tries to move very gracefully to just show to the judges that he is the king.
Frank was a master at finishing. He had this secret ability to suddenly get in shape literally overnight.
Frank Zane would do one set of sit-ups for an hour. I'm like, wow.
I would do things to distinguish myself from the pack.
He was different.
I wouldn't be in the gym training when everybody else was there. As a matter of fact, I would disappear the last month. Nobody knew where I was. I would never show up in a public place.
I once was considered like the unbeatable guy, and now all of a sudden, Frank Zane won.
Getting defeated by, as his words, a chicken with 17-inch arms. At least this chicken was very muscular and you weren't.
Very few people can claim to have beaten the 6'2", 250-pound Arnold Schwarzenegger, but only one person can claim to beat him while standing at 5'9", 185 pounds with 17-inch arms. A loss that caused the biggest bodybuilder in the world at the time to cry the whole night. At a time when overwhelming mass ruled, Frank Zane defied all odds and changed the trajectory of the sport by being the antithesis of the monster physiques of Oliva and Schwarzenegger, introducing an unmatched combination of muscle density, symmetry, flow, and leanness that made him indistinguishable from a marble statue. During the peak of his career, he took on the nickname of the Chemist and earned a reputation for having one of the most aesthetic physiques to ever grace the stage. Despite criticism about his lack of size from some judges, fans, and Joe Weider, Frank didn't listen and went on to win the biggest contest in bodybuilding 3 consecutive times, beating some of the most massive bodybuilders on the planet in the process. This is the story of the math teacher who became the poster boy of bodybuilding beauty.
Everything that I've stuck with in my life occurred at age 14, and bodybuilding was one of those things. I saw Muscle Magazine. I went to a place where it had back issues of Muscle magazines in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, the area where I grew up, and started reading them. Came in handy because I lived in a sort of a tough area, and my younger brother was always mouthing off and getting in fights, and I would end up finishing him. So I figured that, I needed to build myself up and be as strong as I could. As I got a pair of dumbbells, and I started working out in my basement, and I made progress real fast. It was about 2 weeks, and I saw lats coming out and pecs developing. By the time I graduated from high school, I had a pretty decent physique. I was always a skinny kid. I had very small bones, but I had a good structure for bodybuilding, small hips and wide shoulders. Steve Reeves was my bodybuilding idol. I really looked up to him in that development, sort of patterned my training after what I thought he did. And then there was a guy who had a home gym not too far from where I lived, and I used to go there too. So we had about 6 guys in the area that were really interested in it. They were doing odd lifting. Today's version is powerlifting. Yeah. The lifts were curl, bench press, and deadlift. It wasn't squat because nobody squatted except me. I wish they did have squat because I was always a good squatter. But I went in a couple contests like that. I think my first contest I curled 165, bench press 285, and deadlifted 425. But really that wasn't for me. I mean, I didn't see how you could be a good weightlifter and a top bodybuilder at the same time. Well, this isn't for me. I'm never going to get anywhere in the AAU. And that was the time when the IFBB was just coming up. And so when I found out there was IFBB and they're having contests in the New York City area, I started going in those and I started winning trophies. My first contest, I was 18. It was open novice contest in near Allentown, Pennsylvania. Bob Hoffman was there, the father of American weightlifting. And Hoffman came over to me and he said, "Young man, if I had a physique like yours, walk around with my shirt off all the time." And there were about 50 guys in that. I came in 5th. And then I went to college for 4 years and got a degree in teaching secondary education. And my first year I taught in Hamburg, Pennsylvania. I was a chemistry major my first 2 years. I was taking up to 700 capsules a day. And I was taking 100 amino acids, 100 liver extract. Oils too, like lecithin.
That is on top of food?
Yeah. I mean, that's how I became known as the chemist, because of doing stuff like that. My body was the living laboratory.
Just like Frank, most bodybuilders at the time had to figure out what worked and what didn't through trial and error. If the internet existed back then, though, they would have had much easier access to scientific research. But they would have also needed today's sponsor, NordVPN. If you wouldn't reveal your home address to strangers,
Hi, I'm Kevin LeBron.
why leave your device's IP address out in the open to be easily targeted by hackers? With Nord, you can instantly encrypt your online traffic and browse the internet securely with access to 6,700 ultra-fast servers in over 100 countries. For example, while researching the next video, one article wasn't available within my region, but with one click, I was able to change my location and access the article easily. This also goes for all of your favorite streaming services like Netflix, giving you access to content only available in other countries. Nord is more than just a VPN. Their Threat Protection Pro scans files you download and websites you visit for possible threats, protecting you from phishing, scams, ads, and malware. This video wouldn't have been possible without Nord, so if you want to support the channel while securing your personal information, go to nordvpn.com/ironhistorian and get an exclusive offer plus 4 free extra months with a risk-free 30-day money-back guarantee. Thank you, Nord, for sponsoring this video.
But then I went into secondary education to teach chemistry and math. And there were a number of foundries in town, and the kids went and got weights from the foundries. We had a weightlifting club, and I worked out there. They all said, "Why are you doing that? What are you, queer? You're shaving your legs. Are you fairy?" On and on and on. It was just constant, especially when I lived in Pennsylvania. That's all I ever got. I couldn't wait to leave. After that, I taught a year in Pennsylvania, competed a little bit. A year in New Jersey, compete a little bit.
And in 1965, the very first time they had that Mr. Olympia, you were in the Mr. Universe, and you won your weight class along with Earl Menard and Rick Wayne.
I was teaching school in New Jersey at the time, and I had a proportioned good physique, but I lacked a lot of definition, but I had the shape.
You getting up to 180 when you were 18. Then later, in 1965, you bulked up to 220 and then trimmed down to 190. Are you essentially saying that you did all of this naturally?
Yes. And after that, the next year, 66, I came in and I was in really good shape next year.
Yeah, you won your class, and Chet Yorton won the overall.
And then 67, I went in again, and I was even in better shape, and Don Howarth won it that year. And so I resolved to win it in 68, and I did. I wanted to save Mr. Universe for the next year, so I had something to train for.
What was your first impression of Arnold when you first met him in 1968 IFBB Mr. Universe comp?
I thought he was big, white, without a tan, and smooth. And I wasn't that impressed. A friend of mine at the time, Jim Hazlip, he competed in the NABBA Universe, and he came back and he said, "Don't worry about Arnold." He says, "He's really smooth." I was more concerned about Ricky Wayne, who was in shape all the time, but he wasn't competing. But Arnold was just not ready for the show. I mean, he was acting so arrogant and cocky like the winner, but he wasn't in shape because it was all about being big and, size with him.
When they announced the 4th place, 3rd place, and the 2nd place, Arnold Schwarzenegger. I once was considered like the unbeatable guy, and now all of a sudden Frank Zane won. I was so devastated. I was lying there in the middle of the night in bed. I cried the whole night.
He was Joe Weider's boy. Yeah. I remember standing on stage, and he's holding my hand up as the winner, and he said, "Well, Frank, what do you think about Arnold? Isn't he great what potential he has? I'm going to fly him to California and build him up and make him into a real champion." I said, "Hey, Joe, what about me? I just beat him for Mr. Universe. What are you going to do for me?" Of course, he's not used to losing, so he wrote an article for Weider. It said, "I lost Mr. Universe to a chicken with 17-inch arms." And my reply to that is, at least this chicken was very muscular and you weren't. I really got tired of the weather in the Northeast, so I moved to Florida, and I got a job teaching mathematics in St. Petersburg. Trained there for 3 years and then moved to Southern California, which was where it was happening then. That's when it really took off in 1969 when I landed in Southern California. Arnold was already there. We had brought him out, and I teamed up with him, and we worked out together for about 4 years. I had an apartment a couple blocks away from his, and he'd come over, and I'd ride to the gym with him. It was very methodical. He'd always show up on time. He worked out really hard. He was very focused. Of course, I was too, and so, he was a great training partner.
By that time, Frank had started to establish himself in California, training with the likes of Arnold, Franco Columbu, and Ed Corney, among others. His previous victories also caught the attention of Joe Weider. Impressed with his physique, Joe began to pay him for articles, photo shoots, and endorsements. Unlike Arnold, Frank never classed himself as a weeder athlete. However, he still took Joe's advice about posing and training.
So in 1969, I competed in Mr. World and won that. And then in 1970, I went to NABA Universe and won Amateur Universe. Arnold won Pro Universe, and my wife won Miss Universe Bikini. And then 1971, I trained the summer in South Africa and then went up to London to compete. And I was in great shape, but Bill Pearl won that. He was their favorite.
You were in outstanding shape in that one. That was probably, up until that time, that was probably your best condition to date, right?
It was. And, you know, Bill was a legend in London, and they're so enamored with Bill that they didn't even compare us. I won my class, he won his class, and they just gave it to him. He posed good, but, you know, he had a lot of flaws. I learned something from Pearl in that contest. I was sitting right in front of the judges for the prejudging when there was Bill Pearl, Dave Draper, Sergio Oliva, Reg Park. He was supposed to turn right and show his right side, but Bill turned left and never showed his right side. And one of the judges said to him, "Bill, it's quarter turn to the right, not the left." Like, he ignored him. Then the judge said again, "Bill, come on, quarter turn to the right, not the left." And Bill looked at him, he says, "Don't be difficult." And they let it pass. And I realized at that time that, you know, when you're favored, you can get away with stuff like that. With all that knowledge I picked up in 71 by not winning, 1972, I went there and won Professional Miss Universe. The next day, we went to Essen, Germany to compete in my first Mr. Olympia. I didn't do very well in that at all.
I mean, you got fourth place there.
I mean, it was Arnold's contest in Essen, Germany. He didn't deserve it. Sergio should have won. Oh, yeah, he was in great shape. But Arnold was a month out. But, you know, they gave it to him because it was in Germany.
In 73, you were traveling a lot, right? You were doing exhibitions.
Yeah, I did a lot of exhibitions that next year, so I didn't compete in it. Then 74, in the Olympia that year, was in Madison Square Garden. There was only 4 guys in it. Arnold and Lou Ferrigno in the tall class, and me and Colombo in the shorter class.
Although there were only 4 competitors, there were, for the first time, 2 weight classes, under 200 pounds and over 200 pounds. Frank was in fantastic shape that year, and he and Franco posed for the judges side by side at the prejudging. The conundrum was obvious. Here were 2 polar opposite physiques, one thick and massive, and the other lean and symmetrical. Eventually, the judges' decision was based on their personal preferences.
And he beat me there. Of course, I didn't think he should. I was so surprised that he did. I mean, I like Franco and everything, but, you know, he wasn't fair. He wasn't a fair competitor. He would do things to sabotage my posing. I remember he was up in the control booth and he took the needle off my record and scratched it when I was posing.
Frank went back to training and preparation for the Olympia of 1975, a year that was going to be pivotal in the history of bodybuilding, but one of the worst in his career. By 1975, the reigning champ was riding high on a winning streak that began 5 years earlier, with legendary challengers establishing themselves as true threats to his burgeoning dynasty. The 1975 Olympia made for a very compelling storyline, as a whole camera crew was on hand to document the entire thing for the soon-to-be legendary film, Pumping Iron.
They're filming Pumping Iron in Gold's Gym, and I said, "Well, this is a madhouse. I can't train here." I said, "You know, why don't you just call the movie Pumping Arnold? Because it's all about him. It's not about the history of bodybuilding like you say it is. It's always like this." I went over to Vince's gym to train while they were filming in Gold's Gym. It was sort of really upsetting there. You know, it was like you couldn't train because they're always there with the cameras and getting in the way. And I was more interested in working out than being part of that. And, you know, 1975 wasn't a really good year for me. I competed in the Olympia, and I really shouldn't even gone to that. It was in South Africa. It was one of those contests where I really wasn't ready for it. My schedule was sort of upended. My teaching situation really wasn't firm, and there was other things happening and moving and things like that. And I really wasn't in that great a shape. I was actually embarrassed by it. I was so embarrassed when I saw it on TV.
Frank's smooth conditioning and size, which was smaller than usual, landed him in 4th place in the under 200-pound class behind Franco Colombo, Ed Corney, and Albert Beckles.
I think it was just me and Franco. I wasn't in that great a shape for it. Neither was he. And I remember him telling me, he said, "Next year, I get them all by the neck." And so in 76, you know, he was in better shape. And he did get them by the neck. Got me by the neck. So after I saw the results of the 75 Olympia and what I looked like, I really was sort of angry. I made up for it after that. Basically, in 1976, in February, I went back to New York and we did a guest posing at Whitney Museum, Arnold, Ed Corney, and myself. That was the start of it. After that, I just kept training really hard, moved into a new condominium in Santa Monica and really had a great training situation. And I got in the best shape of my life up to that point.
It was here that Frank and Joe Weider began to differ in their philosophy. Joe was very much a size guy. He preferred and demanded freakishness in his top bodybuilders. Yes, they needed to be lean, but they had to be large and muscular above all else. Frank's reputation for symmetry and proportion was already well established by that time, and he didn't share Joe's thoughts. His commitment to symmetry and aesthetics eventually paid off, but not before hitting one last road bump. For the first time in 6 years, the Mr. Olympia would have a new champion in 1976 after Arnold announced his retirement from competing, for the time being at least. This year, he was promoting the contest with his partner Jim Lorimer in Columbus, Ohio. The contest was wide open, but Franco Columbu was the odds-on favorite to win it this year after placing second to Arnold for the last 3 years. He had steadily improved his physique each year leading up to 1976. Many experts felt like he would be the new Mr. Olympia after the dust settled. After his disappointing third place last year, Lou Ferrigno decided to take his chances at a career in professional football. He tried out for the New York Giants and the Toronto Argonauts and was absent from this year's contest. Another name that didn't make it was previous year's second-place winner Serge Nubret, who was suspended for his alleged starring in adult movies in France and wasn't allowed to compete. Despite these absences, Arnold and Lorimer were determined to make their first promotion of Mr. Olympia a raging success. Arnold invited the top professional bodybuilders in the world, including Ed Corney, Bill Grant, and 3 times NABBA Mr. Universe winner Boyer Coe, who was making his Olympia debut. Frank Zane, however, was the wild-card entry in this year's contest, displaying an aesthetic physique that surpassed anything the fans had seen from him before. As contestants began to line up on stage in the under 200 pounds class, it soon became apparent that the real contest was between Franco Columbu and Frank Zane. Franco came in even thicker than the year before and displayed excellent definition and muscularity. Frank, in contrast, was lean, symmetrical, extremely muscular, and ripped. Franco had the momentum going for him after placing second to Arnold the last 3 years, but Frank was really in amazing shape. It was a tight battle, but eventually the thick Columbu beat the aesthetic Zane by only half a point. He also took the overall title and went on to become the first Mr. Olympia winner under 200 pounds. He retired from bodybuilding after this contest due to an injury at the World's Strongest Man competition, where he tore nearly every tendon and ligament surrounding his left knee. With Franco now out of the picture, Frank vowed that 1977 was going to be the Year of Zane. After last year's close win, few doubted that Olympia glory was on the cards for Frank. For many, he wasn't a second best. He was the heir apparent. Spurred on by his narrow loss to Franco, he was like a man possessed in training. One of the reasons Franco got the nod last year was his superior leg development, something that Frank lacked due to his move to Vince Gironda's gym prior to the contest. But his training schedule for the 77 contest spoke of his desire to finally remove any question marks surrounding his physique.
I think that maybe I would have had better legs if I would stayed at Colts because he had equipment. Vince didn't really have it.
He was determined to make 1977 his year. As a proponent of positive thinking and self-affirmations, Frank knew that he needed to manifest his destiny of winning the Olympia in his mind and in others long before the actual event happened on stage.
So you did that, right, Frank? You repeated 1 million times that year that you were going to be Mr. Olympia?
Yeah,
77?
I did.
Yeah, 3,000 times a day or something?
Just about, yeah. I learned that the secret to winning was to win it ahead of time. I had an ad in the Weider magazine. Basically, it said 1977, the Year of Zane. So I put it in people's mind that I was going to be the winner. They needed to know that, so I told them.
However, a new favorite was emerging. one that many consider to be the most exciting bodybuilder to come along since Arnold.
Our next performer, very, very strong possibilities, Robert Robinson from Tallahassee, Florida. There is 205 pounds of great muscle.
Since his debut with the IFBB only 2 short years earlier, Robbie Robinson had won the IFBB Mr. America, Mr. World, Mr. International, and Mr. Universe. As the 1977 Mr. Olympia got closer, he seemed to get bigger, more ripped, and more invincible each month. By the time he guest posed on the AAU Mr. America contest in July, Robbie was unbelievably massive. His perfectly shaped body was bursting with muscle. After taking a year off to try his luck at playing professional football, the 25-year-old Lou Ferrigno was making a comeback this year. At 6'5", he was planning on being much bigger than he was in 1975, and by the summer of '77, he was looking better than ever, and many fans were anticipating a Ferrigno-Robinson showdown for the title that October. Unfortunately for fans, Lou got an offer from CBS 1 month before the Olympia to star in The Incredible Hulk. Lou would have to sit out the contest and wait until next year. Being prominently featured as Arnold's training partner in the legendary Pumping Iron film that came out in January, and his increased popularity gave Ed Corney the motivation he needed to show up at his best in this year's contest. Another challenger that was planning on making shockwaves this year was Ken Waller, who won the over 200-pound class 1 year earlier before losing the overall title to Franco. Realizing the size of the competition, he trained for the contest all year long, in contrast to his normal 3 months. And with other names like AAU Mr. America and NABA Mr. Universe winner Dennis Tinerino, who was making his Olympia debut, Boyer Coe, who was competing in his second Olympia, Albert Beckles, Roger Walker, and Bill Grant, Frank was going to have his hands full holding off these hungry contenders.
Hello, I'm Bobby Addy, and we're in Columbus, Ohio for the Mr. Olympia contest. 4,000 people here, a complete sellout here at Veterans Memorial Auditorium. This has been sold out for over a month and a half.
One of the top favorites for this year's championship is Frank Zane. 5'9", 35 years old, 199 pounds. A math teacher from California.
Eventually, the final pose down came down to Zane, Corney, and Coe in the under 200-pound class, and Waller, Robbie, and Tinerino in the over 200. At first glance, it was evident that Frank presented an almost complete package this year and came in just as shredded, if not more shredded, than the year before. Even though some experts overlooked him as someone who was too small and not imposing enough to stand against guys like Robbie and Ferrigno, this year he changed perceptions with his flow and symmetry that were entirely different to his contemporaries.
I'm standing on stage in that year. They decided not to go 6'5", 4'3", 2'1". They want to announce the winner first. So I'm standing on stage, I'm at the end, and I'm thinking, please, universe, please give me a sign right now so I can know that I won and act more like the winner right now. And at that moment, the judge walks past like this and says, Zane first.
This is the moment you've been waiting for.
Oh yeah, after all these years, it's really great to win what I've been after for so long.
With his first title secured, Frank was now ready to go all in on bodybuilding and begin his reign.
I applied for sabbatical leave, then I just didn't go back after that. 8 years I was teaching. I retired from teaching school and just beefed up my mail order courses and lived as a professional bodybuilder.
After the win, Frank received a lot of criticism from some sections of the bodybuilding press, who felt that he wasn't big enough to deserve the title. Many were also surprised that the pre-contest favorite Robbie Robinson didn't win. After all, he fit the mold set by previous winners like Arnold and Sergio Oliva. Realizing his particular strengths, Frank decided to double down on his conditioning and compete 3 pounds lighter than the year before. In reviewing the photos of his victory the previous year, Frank felt that he was actually in better muscular shape in 76.
And one of the things you also did, Frank, that I read in your book was your wife, Christine, would take pictures of you all the time, and you would analyze the pictures. And you said, this is something that very few other bodybuilders do, right? You were one of the few people that really knew what you looked like when you went into a show.
And I studied the photos. I saw myself from every angle. So I wanted to be more muscular in 78, and I was. And more definition, especially my legs. And I was ready to quit in 78 just to retire after that. But I was hanging around with with powerlifters at that time, sort of motivated me to compete again, and I did. And I went, I think it was like 13 weeks before the show, I really made my decision to enter again.
The 78 Olympia was the third consecutive Mr. Olympia contest promoted by Arnold and Lorimer. Each year, they promoted the show. It grew in prestige, quality, and the number of competitors, which rose to 13 this year. Some new faces were making their first appearance, like Danny Padilla, Cal Sikalik, Roy Callender, and Mohammed Makawi. Others were making a return, like Boyer Coe, Ed Corney, Dennis Tinerino, and of course, Robbie Robinson. At the finals, it came down to Frank, Boyer, and Danny in the under 200-pound class, and Robbie, Roy, and Cal in the over 200. After his successful third-place finish last year, the audience was shocked that Ed Corney didn't make the pose down, but it was no surprise when Danny Padilla was called out for sixth place. The 5'2" giant killer was in good shape, but he was lacking in conditioning. But when the crowd favorite and the wild card of the contest, Cal Sikalik, was announced in fifth place, chaos erupted. Just 1 year earlier, the Hungarian had created an upset when he beat Mike Menser at the Mr. Universe contest in France, and he was making his Olympia debut after 6 competitions where he was undefeated. Taking in the booze, he came up with one of the most unique responses to a poor decision at a bodybuilding contest. Stretching both arms out to his side, Cal let his head fall over to one of his massive shoulders and he closed his eyes. Crucified. Cal was letting his fans know that the judges and the powers that be had crucified him in front of the biggest group of bodybuilding fans all year, unaware of the lawsuit against Joe Weider after a fight they had earlier, or the attempted launch of a pro bodybuilders union. The hardcore bodybuilding fans couldn't understand why this magnificent bodybuilder with more beef than anyone on stage could be relegated to fifth place. Boyer Coe was in great shape. He was much more ripped than the year before, but took fourth place for the second year in a row. Roy Callender, who placed second to Robbie at the Night of the Champions earlier this year, came in astounding shape. With huge chest, back, and arms, he was one of the biggest competitors on stage, but couldn't match the top guys and took third in his very first Mr. Olympia. Almost like an instant replay of the previous year's show, Frank's main rival was Robbie Robinson, who was in outstanding condition. In contrast to last year, when he appeared somewhat bloated, Robbie came in much leaner and more ripped. However, Frank had dramatically improved upon his 1977 condition. His form was amazing, and his physique was chiseled to the bone with every muscle being visible on stage. In the end, symmetry and deep cuts triumphed over overwhelming size again. But next year, another challenger was rising, and he was going to push the defending champ to his limits.
Well, here's the man we feel is the favorite going in, Mike Menser of the United States, and he starts off so
The 1978 Mr. Universe, staged in Acapulco, Mexico, witnessed the 27-year-old, 215-pound Mike Menser's heavyweight class win with the first perfect score ever recorded in IFBB history. 3 months later, he started his pro career by winning the Southern Professional Cup in Florida, and then got second place to Robbie Robinson at the Pittsburgh Pro Invitational, followed by a third-place finish behind Robbie and Danny Padilla at New York's Night of Champions. The rookie sensation, high-intensity trainer was certainly the talk of bodybuilding. He was staring out from the cover of the October Muscle Builder as the bodybuilding world congregated in Columbus for the biggest show of the year. Another name shaking the bodybuilding world at the time was the AAU Mr. America and NABBA Mr. Universe winner Chris Dickerson, who was making his Olympia debut this year, which substantially heated up the competition. Coming off his 2 victories, Frank was favored, but the competition was stiff. To add mass, he'd been training heavier as he had to contend again with Robbie Robinson, the heavyweight winner both previous years, who moved down to the lightweight division this year.
Actually, I think probably the toughest was Robbie Robinson. You know, he was really the greatest, I think. He had a fantastic physique. But I don't think he was that confident when he got on stage. And I think he was a little bit psyched out at me.
This year's contest featured 15 competitors, the largest lineup to date, and the under 200-pound class had swelled to 10 competitors, including Zane, Coe, Padilla, Robinson, and Dickerson. The giant killer wasn't going to slay any giants tonight, as he came in smooth and wasn't in good enough shape, and the same went for Robbie, who was off his usual shape and didn't look as good as last year. He lacked the density he had at his best when he was a few pounds heavier. Chris looked marvelous, with his polished shape and symmetry along with his renowned calves, but his arms looked slightly smaller in such famous company. Boyer was in the best shape of his life. Rumor had it that he sold his lucrative health club in Louisiana just to train in California for this contest. He was so defined and cut that even Arnold said to Chris Lund at the show, "Look at Boyer, I've never seen him looking so cut up." Frank was something else, however. He was reported to be bigger by 8 pounds from last year, yet peeled. He'd sacrificed the tempting cash prize of the pro circuit during the past year, as he believed he could only peak once or twice for a contest. And for him, that contest had to be the Olympia. This year, his chest was splintered. His spinal erectors were striped, and his obliques were diced. His signature vacuum pose was the best pose in the contest and made for the most iconic picture of his career. It was my opinion now that the title was between Coe or Zane, and I thought that Coe had the edge over Zane in overall contest condition, reported Chris Lund. The over 200-pound class featured half as many competitors as the under 200, and they marched on stage led by Roger Walker, then Bob Birdsong, Mike Menser, Dennis Tinerino, and Roy Callender. Winner of 3 pro shows this year and second in last year's Olympia, Roy Callender was, on paper, the favorite. However, in that first year of a loaded IFBB Pro League schedule, he'd entered every previous show, all 8 of them, peaking for one after the other, as well as traveling frequently. On top of that, he was injured and looked smooth on stage. Roy's stumble allowed Roger Walker and Dennis Tinerino to move up 3rd and 2nd respectively. The name on everyone's lips this year, however, was Mike Menser. The rookie juggernaut was densely developed at 5'8", 220 pounds, and looked so confident he couldn't help but throw a couple of muscular poses every now and then with the shouts of heavy duty coming from the audience. Mike dominated the over 200 class, but the question was, would he have enough fine detailing to overtake Frank in the finals?
Right before me was Mike Menser, and he was my competition. You know, they didn't compare us in the prejudging. They just gave us points, and I had 299 points out of 300, and he had 300 points. And they told me that before the evening show. It was me or Mike Menser, and Mike didn't have the experience. I knew I would beat him easily. Even though he was ahead at prejudging, it doesn't matter. I'm going to wipe him out on the posing, and I did. I never thought that he was that formidable of a competitor. He wasn't a great poser. He was sort of clumsy, and I knew that I would beat him. I never had any doubt in my mind. I would hit a shot, and he'd look over at me and hit the same pose, and I'd say, "Oh, that's perfect. It's called follow the leader." He came up pretty fast, and I knew that the fact that he didn't have the experience I did, whenever I thought about that, I think, well, here's a guy who's maybe been in 10 contests, and I've been in 100. And so when I stand next to him, I'm going to outshine him, and I did.
The 6 finalists were Boyer, Chris, Mike, Robbie, Dennis, and Frank. All eyes were on the reigning champ and the fast-rising Mike. Mike displayed an immense level of size and muscularity that were difficult to match. His groundbreaking, heavy-duty training had garnered a significant following, and the crowd was eager to see its results on the Olympia stage. In total contrast, Frank exuded elegance, an aesthetic appeal characterized by well-defined muscle separation and symmetrical proportions. And this year more than ever, his physique possessed a harmonious balance between mass and symmetry. Chris, Dennis, and Robbie finished 6th, 5th, and 4th respectively, and seemed to take the results well. But when Boyer was announced 3rd, the pain and anguish seemed to hit his face as he was pleading to the audience that he'd been robbed. According to the Lund report, at this moment, Mike looked at Frank and said, "Well, it looks like you've come in second." And if both men had looked the same as they did during prejudging, this statement might have held true. However, Mike wasn't the same. He'd smoothed out. As a result, Frank won his 3rd straight title, cementing his status as the face and physique of the lightweight era. 4 was the goal, but the following year didn't hold 1, but 2 roadblocks. "It's not your fault that you won," Mike said to Frank after the contest. Many still thought Mike should have gotten the nod. They wanted the lightweight era to be over and for the ultimate bodybuilding title to go to someone who'd built a bigger physique rather than a sculpted one. Addressing these criticisms, Frank wrote in the February 1980 issue of Muscle and Fitness magazine, "I don't think these people understand that though I don't have the massiveness they think I should have, I have to be doubly good in every other way, proportion, shape, and presentation to make up for it." But as the 1980 Olympia approached, these criticisms were the last thing on Frank's mind. 2 months before the contest, he'd suffered a freak injury that not only threatened his participation, but also his life.
It was 8 weeks before the Olympia, going for the 4th win. Incredible shape. I mean, just right where I had to be. And I was feeling extremely angry because I was thinking, oh God, another 8 weeks of torture. I hate this, man. My life is nothing but doing this. Oh God, I hate this.
And my lightweight lawn chair, and it slid into the pool. And there was a lip that stuck out on the edge of the pool. And I hit the lip in the area between my legs, behind my testicles, and smashed my urethra. And blood was gushing on my penis. I had a catheter put in. And, I lost about a good 10 pounds of body weight. Before that happened, I was like 208 pounds and really solid. And that would have been incredible if that didn't happen. But basically, that's what I had to contend with.
To make things worse, unbeknownst to all competitors, something was happening behind the scenes that was going to mark this year's contest as the most controversial in the sport's history.
In 1980, they decided to let Paul Graham from Australia promote the show. So now for the first time since Arnold retired, he wasn't going to be promoting it. So that summer, he starts training very seriously at World's Gym. Him and Franco and Joseph Wilkosch from Germany, they were all working out together.
Yeah.
And then people were like, man, what's going on with Arnold? Is he getting ready for the Olympia? Because he's not promoting it this year.
Yeah.
He said, no, they're going to finally start filming Conan. So that's the reason he said he was getting in shape. And then the story was that Franco tried to convince him, and he said, man, just go in and win the show. So he never told anybody. And then, of course, Frank Zane used to go to Arnold every year before the contest, and he would pose for Arnold. And he'd say, what do you think? And Arnold would always give him good advice,
You asked Arnold for his advice on competing. Did Arnold actually reveal his intentions to compete then when you asked?
No, we didn't. I asked him. I had just had the accident. I was recuperating from it, and I said, you heard what happened? He said, yeah. I said, are you going to compete? He says, no, I'm going to be there, but I'm going to do the color commentary for CBS. And I said, well, what would you do if you were me? Before that, I would go to him, like a lot of other bodybuilders would too, and do my posing routine and ask his critique of it. And he'd be very detailed and tell me exactly what wasn't there or what needed to be there. And so I just trusted him as being that way. And so he said, you should go to Australia and defend your title. And so I did.
For the first time in 4 years, the Olympia was moved from its comfortable home of Columbus, Ohio, to the unfamiliar settings of Sydney, Australia. But what was even more unfamiliar was the person going home with the Sandow. Seemingly only in Sydney to do commentary for CBS, Arnold showed up at the competitors' meeting and announced he's participating this year. This surprise entry had accomplished what he intended. It rattled the competition and threw everyone off guard. As a proponent of psychological warfare, Arnold always took every chance he could to intimidate and psych out his competition. During the meeting, he disrupted discussions about the rules, attempting to bring the spotlight onto himself, and belittled competitors, which caused a fight to break out between him and Mike Mentzer.
The biggest problem was, since 1974, they started having two divisions in the Olympia. They had an under 200-pound class and an over 200-pound class. So Boyer Coe went to Ben Weider and he said, from now on, why don't we just have one class? So Ben Weider said, yeah, that makes sense. So they took a vote with all the competitors, and all 16 competitors said, yes, let's just have one class, except for Arnold. So Boyer Coe at the meeting said, well, Arnold, we all want to just have one class. Why do you want to keep having the two classes? So Arnold's sitting down and he looks at him and he goes, why don't you act like a man?
They're talking back and forth. Arnold said something to Mentzer about his stomach hanging way out all the time. And Mentzer lunged at Arnold. Bill Pearl broke it up. And I was there watching it. And I said, well, whatever.
So then after that, Arnold said, all right, it's fine. We'll have one class.
Why do you think Arnold decided to come back out of retirement?
In 1979, it was a great victory. And as I came off the stage, he comes over with his microphone and he says, Frank, how does it feel to win Mr. Olympia for the third time? And I said, Arnold, it feels even better than when I beat you for Mr. Universe. And that made it on TV.
All right.
Right after that came on TV, he calls me on the phone and he's screaming at me. I said, yeah, Arnold, the joke was on you for that. And so I think that's one reason why he competed the next year. He wanted to get even. He couldn't leave it at that.
The one thing that appeared to reassure competitors not to worry was that Arnold's conditioning was worse than all his previous Olympias. When the 16 competitors finally walked on stage at the Sydney Opera House Theatre, the audience showed their approval for the Austrian Oak, but few expected him to win.
Mike Mentzer and a few other people said that was the first time they really saw Arnold nervous at a contest. Samir Bannout told me that when Arnold was training in the gym, in World's Gym that summer, he looked fantastic. He was getting big, and it looked like he was gonna, be almost like the Arnold of old. But I guess he hurt his shoulder because he only trained for 8 weeks, and when you have to push it that fast. So he ended up taking a shot of cortisone before he left for Australia. Then when he gets to Australia, he's holding all this water. So Franco looks at him and he goes, what happened? And he goes, I took a shot of cortisone. And he goes, you idiot.
It was evident that Arnold wasn't at 100%. His chest, back, and biceps were as good as ever, but his legs, triceps, and midsection all lacked size and definition. And what he lacked in muscularity and leanness, he made up for with clever posing and distracting his competitors.
Did Arnold play games with you? Because there's a photo of you laughing and him telling you something in your ear.
I don't remember what he said. I think it was I think I said, are you going to try to psych me out now, Arnold? I'm unpsychable. He was on stage and he was supposed to be doing compulsory poses, and he wasn't. He was doing whatever he felt like. And the judge, the guy's name was Dennis Stallard, I remember. He told him, he says, Arnold, do the compulsory poses that we call for. And Arnold ignored him, just kept doing whatever he wanted. He told him again, and then finally he told him the third time, he says, Arnold, you're disqualified, get off the stage. Arnold didn't leave the stage, but that night, Dennis Stallard was disqualified as a judge and flew back to England.
5-time Mr. Universe Boyer Coe was at his all-time best. Although his structure was a little blocky and lacked in aesthetics, he'd exceeded his condition from the year before, and his arm poses were some of the best on stage. After dominating the Grand Prix competitions, Chris Dickerson was poised to upset the current king of bodybuilding. Standing at 5'6", he had the most completely developed physique on stage, with thick lats and traps that were superior to Arnold's, separated quads, perfectly shaped calves, and elegant posing. Last year's runner-up almost killed himself in preparation for his contest. Word was Mike Mentzer was a full 10 pounds bigger and even more ripped than last year. With some of the biggest legs and thickest arms on stage, Mike had no doubt in his mind that tonight would be his. Other challengers in phenomenal shape were Roy Callender, who was the thickest guy on the show with thick pecs, razor-sharp abs, and massive arms, and the hometown favorite Roger Walker, who got the most applause next to Arnold. As was the case usually, the reigning champ had to be the favorite, especially since Frank would drastically improve year after year. This year, he was sharply defined, and his great structure and superior aesthetics set him apart from the rest of the competitors as always. But thanks to the accident, he'd lost a significant amount of muscle. When relaxed, he was hard to beat, but when he posed, especially from the side, he lacked thickness compared to the bigger bodybuilders. To call Arnold's competition stiff this year would be an understatement, and many put him as 4th or 5th.
Samir told me at the pre-judging, he not only was down in size, I think he was only like 217. His legs were real thin. He had the chest, he had the biceps, but a lot of his other body parts, like his triceps were down, his legs were real down, and he was also holding water. The other problem was the judges. A lot of the judges were friends of Arnold. Reg Park, of course, who was his idol, he was one of the judges. Albert Busak, who was like friends with Arnold since Arnold was a teenager, he was one of the judges. And they had a guy from Australia was supposed to be a judge. His name was Peter McCarthy. So then they replaced him and they put this kid in place who I guess had some controversy in Australia. And this kid loved Arnold.
In 6th place came Roger Walker, who looked good but was blocky and couldn't contend with the rest of the guys. When Mike Mentzer was announced in 5th place, he was infuriated and exclaimed bullshit while being handed the award. Boyer Coe, who was in the best shape of his life and described as absolutely out of this world by reporter Jack Neary, received 4th place. The defending champ's shape wasn't good enough to land him a runner-up spot this year, and he ended up in 3rd. When Chris Dickerson walked on stage to accept the runner-up position and Arnold was announced in 1st place, the boos crescendoed in disbelief at the decision.
You know, whether or not I should have won, it's debatable. Arnold, geez, maybe 5th place. I think him winning that was a gift. You know, I wouldn't put him as the winner. And after the show, Arnold went on stage and all the people were assembled waiting for somebody to say something. And Arnold said to the audience, "This proves once and for all time that I'm the greatest bodybuilder of all time." And it was met by a resounding chorus of boos. He got booed off the stage, and I think he was very crestfallen after that.
Did Arnold ever tell you, though, why he deceived you?
Yeah. After the contest, I was having breakfast with him, and I asked him about it. He said he used a political analogy, and he says, you know, if Jimmy Carter goes up to Reagan and says, Reagan, this is exactly how I'm going to win the presidency. And he tells him everything that he's going to do. He said, Reagan would be a fool not to take advantage of that. He took advantage of it. Then he said the classic line, competition is about strategy, not friendship.
Did you feel resentment for that?
I still do.
In the wake of the controversy, Mike Mentzer completely retired and some bodybuilders withdrew from smaller contests. It was rumored that Frank threw his trophy against the wall and broke it, but that wasn't the case. According to his blog, as he was picking up the trophy, the oil from his body had spread to the trophy and it slipped out of his hand, hit the floor, and fell apart. Arnold's win was criticized in magazines throughout the year, and before bodybuilding could recover from the Olympia fiasco, it was heading into yet another controversy the following year.
Boyer Coe, Mike Mentzer, Frank Zane, and Albert Beckles all said, we're not going in 81, we're boycotting the show. Because they heard rumors that Franco was going in it. And they said, after what happened in 1980, we know Franco's going to win. It's guaranteed. And Dickerson at first said he was going to boycott it, but then he figured, hey, I'm 2nd, so I could win. You know?
Their prediction turned out to be correct. The 81 Olympia witnessed Franco Columbu following in his best friend's footsteps and making a comeback of his own after a career-ending injury. Franco won the title with an inferior lower body and beat guys like Tom Platz, Danny Padilla, and Roy Callender, who were in the best shape of their lives.
Now, do you wish you would have won in 81 when Franco won?
I wish I would have done that. I wish I would have bowed out in 80 and went in 81 because I would have wiped him out. Franco wasn't that good. He had a bitch tit and a gimp leg, yet he won 6.
I wonder what the judges would have done if you would have came in better than ever, better than 79. I mean,
they would have had to give it to me.
Determined to get back in the game and reclaim his title, Frank's set to come in bigger than he ever did in 1982, a decision he'd soon come to regret.
In 2nd place, Frank Zane, USA.
Actually, in 1982 was the year that I was in London for the Mr. Olympia that year. And I came in too big. Everybody was saying to me, you need to get bigger. So I figured I'm going to weigh 200 for the show, and I did. But in paying attention to that number, I lost track of getting ultra defined. And so if I was a little bit lighter and more defined, I think I would have won that show easily, but I didn't. Now, there were years when I wasn't as confident, like 1982. I found myself on stage looking up and down at the competition like that.
I think I would look better if I was maybe 195.
Yeah.
I had this obsession to weigh 200. I had really good definition and everything, but I was a little bit thicker through the middle of my body than I had been in the past. Now, not that I think that Dickerson was that good or deserved to win. He wasn't. It's just that Bill Pearl made a big difference. Pearl was one of the judges in London, and London is like, Bill Pearl is God in London. He had a great deal to do with Dickerson winning. Bill was his coach.
Chris Dickerson, I mean, the guy, he's so cocky that year, I remember too. Fuck you. You're lucky to win. Lucky Bill Pearl was there as your mentor and putting the bug in everybody's ear for you.
The 1983 competition was supposed to be Frank's return to glory. But unfortunately, disaster struck.
And in 83, I was all set to do that, and I had a back accident, tore my rotator cuff, and I trained with that. It prevented me from getting as big as I would have liked. And you know, in bodybuilding, especially with me, what it was is if judges see you big and muscular one year and then smaller the next year, it doesn't help you. You just get voted down. And so I was great in 1983, in incredible shape, definition, but I wasn't as big.
Here to block fourth place, Frank Zane, USA.
I was thinking, I want to win 4 Olympias.
I got the 4, but it was 4th place. And when I got that, I think, well, you know, that's it. That's my Omen. This is it. And I realized that was the end of my competitive career. I was 41. I saw the writing on the wall already. Lee Haney's placing ahead of me, you know, and the new guy, big monster. I saw that's what it's going to be from now on. And I said, well, this is it. You know, I got to let it go. And it wasn't easy. It wasn't easy. It's like the change of life. When you start out, basically, you're working on building up your ego. And what you're actually doing is you're putting on a suit of armor to shield you from fear. And then with a layer of muscle. But that's your shield. That's bodybuilding as character armor. Nobody ever told me, you can do it. You have everything it takes. Nobody ever told me that.
What we're doing is creating a perfect body. And it's a very elusive thing. It's a sport, it's an art form, it's a performing art, it's a beauty contest, it's all of these things.